Welcome to Fortt Knox. I am Jon Fortt here at One Market this time, normally at the NASDAQ market site, but I'm here live. We're going to talk Consumer Electronics Show. We're going to talk autos, lots of different stuff. Welcome to all of our CNBC viewers on YouTube, Fortt Knox viewers who have been with us from the beginning. We're across platforms, Facebook, Periscope, YouTube, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, maybe even a couple others. I don't know. We're streaming all over the place. But I want to say welcome, first of all, to my guests, Steve Vassallo of Foundation Capital, Alex Davies of Wired. We're going to talk about transportation. Rob Lloyd from Hyperloop One is going to join us. Pat Moorhead from Moor Insights and Strategy is going to join us from Vegas in just a bit. But I want to start off talking about the story of the day in consumer tech. A couple of Apple investors own about $2 billion worth of the stock, which sounds like a lot, but it's less than 1%. But still, they're asking the company to add more parental controls. Now, parental controls are good. Don't get me wrong. I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and we're very, in our heads about screen time and exactly how to monitor it. But it's not Apple's job to potty train my child. We have a certain number of controls already. Guys, Steve, let's start with you. What do you think of what is being proposed here?
Well, I think it's an interesting point in terms of the underlying trend. I don't know that it will actually move anything with respect to Apple. In other words, I don't think product development at Apple gets moved by really any investors of substance. I think it gets moved by the development team, the design organization, and the priorities that Tim sets for the company. I do think the larger arc of this story, though, is a really important one for the tech industry to be absorbing. There's been a movement, as you're probably familiar, over the last few years, work of people like Sherry Turkle at MIT, who's been studying really the intersection of science, technology, and society. She's written a couple of books around this. And it's absolutely the case that these technologies are crowding out what she calls sort of real conversations. They're crowding out, what are the sort of substrates for sort of building real relationships. And I do think that is the responsibility of the technology industry to be aware of that. I think, look, we're carrying around in our pockets these supercomputers that have more computing power than NASA did in 1969, and all we can do is build applications that encourage kids to go basically hunt wild animals, usually against their will, oftentimes then tricking them to get other wild animals to be part of the whole charrette. So I do think we do need to look harder at this. I don't think this is going to matter for Apple really in the short term.
Alex, we've seen Facebook put out this messenger product for kids. We've seen YouTube have YouTube Kids, which is supposed to be a safe place for kids, but there's controversy around that. Amazon has some pretty good parental controls, arguably more granular than Apple, where you can set time limits for usage, things like that. Do you think that's a direction that Apple should move in? Where are you on this?
I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think you certainly don't want to see Apple have the kind of controversy that YouTube has had, where YouTube really is, for kids these days, TV more than TV is. And you see all these, like Paul Logan.
Logan
Paul, sorry.
No,
I'm a little bit old, I guess, for YouTube TV.
You're on YouTube TV.
Yeah, okay, I'll take it. They've had terrible problems here with what people are putting out and what kind of supervision YouTube has. And going beyond the kids thing, if you look at the way Facebook controls the conversation and Twitter controls the conversation online with all of the election stuff, it's a growing problem, and it makes sense for companies to at least be thinking about what their role is in curating what we see.
Here's the thing, though. I worry about parents sort of abdicating responsibility to the technology companies. First, in hiring the iPhone as a babysitter, whether it's at the restaurant or wherever. And we are all guilty of this at times, so, I'm not without sin here entirely. But I try not to entirely abdicate responsibility. If you don't want your kid wasting 5 hours a day on the phone, give them a feature phone. Give them a flip phone instead of a smartphone. Or Apple already allows you to restrict apps and gives parents the ability. You have a restriction passcode. Take the browser off the phone. Right. Restrict what apps are on there. Make sure they don't even have Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat on the phone. Or when they come home from school, take the phone until they're done with their homework. Like, That's a level, old school parental control. Actually control your kids.
And by the way, there are technologies that make that easier. So you can see this in some of the next generation routers and wireless hubs. So Eero, which launched at CES a few years ago, actually has this built in. Disney actually acquired a company related to this. It actually was built in a number of different services for them as well, where you could actually set timers so that after 10 o'clock, for example, your teenagers aren't online anymore. They can only do the work on their laptops in their home. So I think this kind of cuts across lots of different things. But your point is a good one around, like, old school parenting really makes sense. There's an entire track, by the way, at CES right now around pimping out your nursery. So what kind of cameras and sensors can you be adding?
Pimping and nursery are two words that should never
go together, right? Exactly. So, but from a technology perspective, but like, how do you outfit your nursery with all these technologies? Well, it turns out like being there still matters, right? And so I think, and this is of course, one of the fundamental things that Sherry talks about in all her work at MIT. But you don't get to sort of, effectively offload the parenting to a digital device. Steve Jobs didn't let his kids, who were still pretty young at the time, use any of these devices that he helped birth.
Yeah, I mean, we're very careful about it, exactly when they get iPad time, what they get to do on them, video games on weekends only. Alex, I don't know if you have kids, I don't know if you have, but I remember when I was first dealing with kind of the prehistoric version of this, when I was a teenager at home, it was about phone usage. Because I got home, the old messaging was to actually pick up the phone and dial your friend's number and talk to them on a corded phone, right? And my dad tried to restrict my usage by getting like this super phone. He had a phone that showed when any phone in the house was off the hook and how long the call had been, right? But I tried to game the system. I would leave phones off the hook to create false positives, where he'd call me, Jonathan, where are you? Are you on the phone? Oh, no, I must have forgotten to hang up that call, right? Get him to mistrust the system. I mean, kids are going to be smart even with these parental controls, right? It's not like Apple can solve this problem for us.
No, and I do think that, the parents really still have to play that key role. You can do the kind of approach that France example just took. I mean, this is schools, not at home, but they just said no more phones in school at all. And I think that's like elementary school and middle school. I'm not sure about high school.
Right.
But, that's one way to do it. Just take them away.
But that's dangerous, too. I want my kid to be able to call if something goes wrong at school.
So, that's the thing. You've always got to find that balance, right? And I think that's going to come down to every family figuring out however they want to do. But it should be the job of Apple to at least give you the tools to do that and to make it easy and to make it obvious how exactly you can control that.
Let's talk GoPro for a moment. A lot of people will remember GoPro around, 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago, went public with a lot of fanfare, action sports athletes, extreme sports athletes using these cameras, strapping them to their bodies, getting this footage, the likes of which we had never seen before. The company went public, was trading up in the high 90s per share. Today, trading just under $6, I believe, because those cameras not as hot as they used to be. So while we're talking about kids can't put their phones down, the GoPros are in a drawer somewhere collecting dust. Also, GoPro a year ago said they were going to launch this drone. Drones were hot at CES and elsewhere last year. Now GoPro says, nah. The drone was, I guess, reasonably popular, though DJI's Phantom drone's more popular. It's just too crowded a space. Right. We're bailing out. What does this mean for consumer tech? Were drones ever going to be a big consumer product? And are they? Or is this a sign of the times? Alex.
I think drones right now actually look a lot like GoPros in terms of the way you're supposed to use them, and that for a while that was the really hot Christmas gift, right? You got a GoPro, you got a drone. It made sense for them to go together, but after a while you think about, like, is this a fad? Because what are these really going to be used for other than, like, playing around? You fly your drone around, you fly it over your house or over the park. Maybe you fly it into an airplane, and this brings up other problems with drones. I think when you talk about the way drones will transform how society actually works, that's not the personal drone. That's not the thing you're playing around with. It's the drones that's going to do deliveries or monitor livestock or railroad yards, or, there are all these bigger, more commercial applications. It's hard to see how far the personal drone or GoPro market can really go.
Steve, you have a drone?
I do have a drone. I have actually a few drones, way back to the very first Phantom ones, actually. And they're a blast to have as a personal device, but it is...
How often do you fly them?
Probably the first 6 months we flew it, probably almost 2 or 3 times a week, like on the weekends. In fact, I remember getting, doubling up on batteries so you could kind of keep going. And that was, by the way, one of the biggest issues, because just energy density for these devices is pretty high. So I think you asked a question around GoPro, and I think GoPro is actually symptomatic of a larger trend, which is there are a lot of startups, and we invest in lots of early stage companies that have thrown themselves into hardware. And in fact, because hardware sort of has been easier to fund in the more recent years through vehicles like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, these crowdfunded campaigns have enabled a lot of these companies to get off the ground. But what I think that belies is a fundamental issue that's still very hard for hardware companies, which is it's not enough to sell a 55-point gross margin device. You need to figure out how to attach some sort of software business model to it. So the positive example of this was a company called Dropcam, which was acquired by Nest several years ago for whatever, $750 million.
Now part of
and is now a very big part of Google's hardware strategy. And what's fascinating about that business, which was built by an executive who's now back at Apple, actually, it turns out, was they had 40% attach rates of their software service. So,
attach rates for the people sitting at home, meaning
using the service.
If you got the camera, you also paid for the service.
For the service. And the service was a simple DVR service, which enabled you to look at the last 7 days worth of videos. If someone had, for example, the UPS guy had dropped off a package, you could see that there. If the UPS guy dropped off a package that the FedEx guy actually stole, you could see that as well. And it turned out actually there was a lot of fascinating stories that sort of bubbled up, videos that bubbled up of these sort of security use cases, which is actually not what the product was intended for. But the 40% attach rate is a lesson in terms of hardware business models, where if you can find a way to build a service out of this, not a trivial service that's sort of like, hey, I sell the lock company and the service is unlocking your lock. That's not enough. But in the case of Dropcam, it was sort of something that users deemed as hard to do, but yet very, very worthwhile, and was worth $9.99 a month, which has scaled quite well for them. So I think the problem with GoPro is they never figured out an annuity business model. Right. It's, by the way, the same problem that Fitbit has, and many other hardware companies have. And I think Apple, in some senses, has defied gravity here, because they've turned sort of the only hardware model I've ever seen into almost a repeatable business, because every 12 to 18 months, you buy another one, right? So
it's a nice trick.
Anyway,
yeah, if you can figure it out. Well, we've talked small-scale transportation with drones. Let's talk a little bigger, a lot bigger. You are watching CNBC's Fortt Knox, live streaming across multiple platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV. Joining us now to add to the conversation, Rob Lloyd, CEO of Hyperloop One, is coming to us from Las Vegas. Rob, you've been busy building out this vision of Elon Musk's and hitting new benchmarks. But before we get to the product details and what you've come up with next, I got to ask you about Shervin Pishavar, co-founder, executive chairman for a time of the company. He has stepped back amid allegations about his personal behavior. How much of a loss is that for Hyperloop, now Virgin Hyperloop One, you were called, with Richard Branson joining, and where do you go from here?
Well, actually, we're pretty excited that where we went from Shervin's resignation was to Richard Branson as the chairman of the company, and some of our largest and longest-term shareholders stepping up for recent financing. So I think we feel really good about that. Obviously, having Richard Branson, a global entrepreneur, someone that really is well trusted, has built airlines, train systems, is putting people into space. That's the kind of the boldness of the dream that we have here at Virgin Hyperloop One, and we're thrilled and absolutely tickled pink to have him as our new chairman.
So the Hyperloop concept, you've gotten a number of different municipalities, I guess, in various geographies to sign on, talking to the United Arab Emirates, talking to Russia. You're at the Consumer Electronics Show. Hyperloop doesn't strike me as consumer electronics. What's the upside for you being there?
Yeah, the upside, John, is really clear. Now that we've proven the technology works, and even recently we announced that we've gone even faster, 240 miles an hour, just inside 500 meters. The tech works. And as part of that tech development, we actually built a very sophisticated control system that actually controls the pod and the electronics as we move through the vacuum environment. So what we're announcing here, and the reason we are here, is just going fast inside a Hyperloop isn't going to change the experience that really kind of drags you and I down every day, and traffic outside here is brutal already as the CES rolls forward. So it's this application sitting on top of our control platform, connecting to other modes of transport, partnering with HERE Technologies with its very precise location-based services, and the first application that's using their new mobile software development environment that is allowing us to create an experience for passengers that's end-to-end, something quite transformational. So Hyperloop's fast. We know it's going to be fast, even if it's deployed in its initial situations of maybe 50 to 100 miles. But what about connecting to a ride-sharing service? What about connecting to a metro? What about having an end-to-end journey time that could be chosen by the consumer on 3 different characteristics: the fastest, the cheapest, and the greenest? And that's the basis of the application we're showing, the first in the world to actually include Hyperloop in that mix of multi-modes of transportation.
Exciting possibilities. Alex, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that Rob will be the first to tell you that the physics of Hyperloop are sound, really from the very beginning when Elon Musk threw out this idea of levitating trains and nearly airless tubes. You know, it sounds fantastic, but it actually just makes a lot of sense. What I'm really interested to see Rob and Hyperloop One and the other companies crowding into the space take on is how do you actually build out the infrastructure of this thing? Because that's what's really going to be tricky. You know, we have maglev trains. That technology works, but they haven't really taken off because they turn out to be really expensive, hard to maintain.
The infrastructure, do you mean the ecosystem, the types of partners it's going to take to actually make this scale?
That's part of it. I'm also, though, talking about the raw infrastructure of building this stuff. That takes a lot of money, and it's something that I think is a little bit new to Silicon Valley.
Rob, what do you say? What's that going to take?
It's going to take partnerships with governments, large institutional investors, pension funds, and others that actually want to build that infrastructure. But I'll tell you guys, it's going to be 2/3 of the cost of high-speed rail. Josh Geigel and his engineering team are working on some advanced manufacturing methods, which would allow us to build at multiple times faster than you see right now being built in classic high-speed rail. We're on pylons, so we don't have to condition every single inch of the ground as is required for rail. We need a more narrow right-of-way, so we don't need as much land, which often takes a lot of time to assemble those land tracks. We can go underground easily without digging a massive tunnel because we do reduce the pressure. So a lot of things are going to allow us not only to go faster from a transportation perspective, but also be much faster to build and develop these projects. So as we begin to look at some of those projects that you mentioned around the world, it's a couple of years to build, not a decade, and I'd expect that we should be testing those first systems in 2021, working with local authorities to regulate and test and certify them from a safety perspective, and starting to put these projects in place 2021 through 2023. And that's the goal of the company, and we're still on track.
So I think there's another trend that's afoot with this, and I'd love to get your perspective, Rob, on this as well, is just I think there is a push towards much more multimodal transportation. So you asked, why is transportation part of CES? Well, I think technology and transportation have intersected in a really substantial way. Whether you look back even the last 15 years, it's been around the connected car. What we're looking forward to over the next 10 to 15 years is the autonomous vehicle. But there is absolutely a push towards much more multimodal. What I mean by that is, for some shorter distances, you're going to actually find people actually spending more time walking. You're going to see more bicycles, certainly in urban environments, the way we see in China. You're going to see things like Hyperloop One for those sort of point-to-point, whether I'm going from San Francisco to LA. And on either ends of that, I may actually have an Uber car, then an OFO bike, and then walk, right? And so, but I think this belief that there's a kind of one-size-fits-all for transportation, which is kind of how the U.S. Transportation network has been built of highways and roads. I think those days are, while huge path dependencies to get off that, those days are numbered, because I think people are much more willing, and we see this through services like Lyft Line and Uber, and Uber is actually iterating on this now. If you're willing to cross the street, you can actually save 10 minutes because the car doesn't have to go around the block.
Right.
Like that, in my opinion, is a green sprout of opportunity that people are willing to actually maybe move a little bit more and use other modes of transportation. So, and that is definitely a consumer trend.
Rob, is multimodal and that
and
trend
guys,
a boon for you?
Absolutely, John. So that's exactly what we're demonstrating with the application. a lot of the projects we see are trying to connect to existing high-density transport centers, airports, train stations, connecting airports together and increasing capacity, ports. So this idea that we can build a single experience that's multimodal, that's what's missing. We don't have that today. We do get someplace, we call our Uber or our Lyft, we get somewhere else, we might take a metro in some cities when the service is available. Some people take public transit, we're on air, and we're driving our cars. We've got to bring that all together, and the application that we're showing is the first application to bring all those modes together. I can see a single ticketing environment, a complete system that allows us to understand exactly how long it takes to get home. So right now I could call up our app that we're showing and be sitting right here in the conference floor and determine to get to the pier in Santa Monica, which is 2 blocks from my place. It's going to take me exactly so long. I'll know that there's a metro that's going to be at that station at a certain period of time, and I can end up at the pier in Santa Monica in a precise level of time, or I can pay less, or I can go greener. And all of those options are absolutely there. But guys, this multimodal thing is very early on. Nothing's connecting all the methods of mass transit. And then think about logistics, and you have an even bigger space of connecting all those disjointed logistic systems in today's on-demand economy. We expect everything delivered the next day, but we have transport systems that are delivering them in weeks. So there's a huge opportunity here in both passenger and cargo.
Rob, it's raining in San Francisco today, so talking about the Santa Monica Pier evokes just a little bit of jealousy from us here at One Market. Rob Lloyd, CEO of Hyperloop One, Virgin Hyperloop One. Thanks for joining us. Guys, Patrick Moorhead is going to be with us from just a moment, also from Las Vegas. So we're going to start talking about some of the, now I guess we call more traditional elements of CES, things like PCs. Now, we had Jensen Huang from NVIDIA just hours ago announcing new stuff from them around power and graphics, big screens, huge gaming displays. We had Lisa Su from AMD also at CES and joining us on CNBC this morning, talking about the advances that they expect to have in mobile PCs in 2018. Is the PC back, Steve?
I don't know that the PC is back. I mean, I look at sort of these waves of innovation as sort of these structural shifts, and I think the largest wave that we've been riding over the last few years is the smartphone wave, and I don't know that there'll be a larger wave than that ever. It's possible that IoT sort of dwarfs that, but it's 10x larger than the PC wave was, which was probably 10x larger than the mainframe wave. I do think that this show tends to sort of attract those kinds of conversations, and Jensen is, of course, a world-class marketer. I do think the applications for his technology around gaming, which, of course, is a big piece of what goes on at that show as well, is huge. And of course, he's also brought that technology into the world of data centers. And in fact, it's now whatever 15% of their revenue is through sort of these ML workloads. But graphics is the bread and butter. That's how the company was built. I think it's absolutely been a brilliant strategy over the last 20 years for NVIDIA. This is a category of technology where if you can produce higher resolution graphics that are faster, there is always going to be an application to take advantage of it. That's not the case in networking or connectivity, but in graphics, that is absolutely fundamental. And Jensen just keeps I think, mining that vein of opportunity. So I think it's a long, long march to continued improved graphics.
Alex, 15 years ago, Microsoft was talking about the auto PC. Everything was going to be a PC. But now we might actually be getting closer to that. Harman, which is now owned by Samsung, announcing this new smart dashboard that's going to bring a Tesla-like experience into other types of cars. You cover transportation and technology for Wired. Is that going to be safe? Is that going to be something we're all going to want?
Yes and no. It's a big mixed bag. Obviously, cars are getting more and more connected. Driver distraction is becoming a big problem. But I think this stuff really becomes more excited once you start seeing more autonomous features coming into cars. People always ask me, like, when is the self-driving car coming? I'm like, well, you can go out.
2025.
Right.
March 2nd.
But, I mean, Tesla, you can go out right now. You could buy a Tesla. It'll drive itself on the highway. You can get a Cadillac, an Audi, a Mercedes. All these car companies are pushing this, and you're going to start seeing it come into more and more models. And the thing that's really exciting about the way these dashboards are going to change is all of a sudden almost ironically, once the human workload is eased, once you don't have to be driving as much, your role within the car becomes much more important. Because normally the fail-safe in a traditional car is if you fall asleep or you stop paying attention, you crash. Now you've got a car that can back you up, that can help you out, but you're the person in charge of saying, okay, something's going wrong here, so it's time for me to take the wheel again. The cars now need to know whether or not you're paying attention.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing some really interesting trends in terms of infrared monitors or infrared cameras to watch your head position, heart rate monitors in seats. You're going to see some really cool stuff, and that's what's really evolving, I think, quickly inside the car.
You know who else is seeing some pretty cool stuff? Patrick Moorhead, principal at Moor Insights and Strategies. This is Fortt Knox live on YouTube, Periscope, Facebook, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV. We're live a lot of places. Patrick, thank you for being live with us from Las Vegas. What are some of the coolest things or surprises that you've seen thus far? It's just gotten started.
Yeah, so the show just barely got started. A bunch of pre-briefings are going on, and just the first briefings happened last night publicly, and I was blown away by Samsung brought out a TV called The Wall, okay? And this thing is 146 inches, and it uses a micro LED technology that keeps the resolution true. Because typically, when you have a massive TV that you literally screw into your wall, it would have very low resolution. Even 4K would be too low.
Pixels the size
and
of bricks.
While Samsung did exactly. You would go up and you would see big pixels, but it looked phenomenal. It was audacious, right? But that's kind of what Las Vegas is about.
And I believe, Patrick, you've also got an Acer laptop there that they're claiming is the thinnest. I forget in what category at this point. One of my favorite things about CES is the superlatives. You get these gigantic TVs that are taller than your house, so there's no way you're fitting that in anywhere, but we still want to see it. There we've got this Acer laptop. What does that represent, and is this something that we're going to be seeing trend-wise in more places?
So I think what it represents is that innovation is alive and well in the PC market. You know, it's funny, 5-6 years ago, people talked about the death of the PC. Well, it's still moving at a clip of about 275 million units per year. And ironically, this year at CES, I'm seeing more innovation in PCs than ever. You have these connected PCs from technology coming out of Qualcomm and Intel. HP and Lenovo are jumping on that. You're seeing super thin gaming laptops that are about 14 millimeter thin that used to be twice or 3 times that, had power bricks the size of your head. But that's coming from technology through an interesting collaboration between Intel and AMD.
It's The Walking Dead. I'm surprised that none of the PC industry CEOs has picked up on that. If the PC is dead, then, you know, here are the walkers. The final thing, you know, I want to find out from you how big a deal voice is going to be, not just at CES, but you think throughout the coming year. Because I'm not sure if voice is a product or if it's just an interface, because we don't know how many units of the Echo or, you know, Cortana-equipped devices or Google Home are really selling, and at what margin. Are these just, this hardware just really a delivery method for the service, or is there some there as far as the product?
Yeah, so it's actually both, and I'm usually more definitive on this, but let me explain. A voice is absolutely UI, and it essentially replaces keyboard, mouse, touch, something like that. And what it does, though, it has the potential to disintermediate the value of the operating system, of the application. So essentially, if companies like Amazon, who failed miserably in smartphones and don't even have a smartphone or tablet OS, if they're successful in getting voice... Oh, yeah. By the way, I have that in my closet in like a basket full of loser phones. But if they can
hopefully
make this
with pictures
thing
of its
stick,
relatives surrounding it and some flowers, yeah.
Exactly. It actually had the first 3D face camera, which Apple with the iPhone 10 is making a killing on. But if they can make the voice interface stick, then they've disintermediated everything that they missed, which was apps, which was mobile operating systems, all of that, and even smartphones.
Pat Moorhead from Moor Insights and Strategies, joining us straight from Las Vegas, the Consumer Electronics Show. Thanks for bringing those insights. Guys, we are wrapping up. I covet your thoughts on the last couple things we talked about there, the PC voice technology. I mean, what Patrick was saying, Alex, reminds me of what happened in the browser era when Microsoft had this huge advantage on operating system, right, and application compatibility. After a while, with Web 2.0, it just didn't matter anymore. Is that what's going to happen with the Echo and voice applications?
It's possible. I mean, you could just see them, like, jump right past. And I really like Patrick's point about the idea of even if Amazon didn't get those phones into your pockets, it can still connect you into what Amazon wants you to be connected to, which is its full suite of services.
Steve, any predictions on what one or two things that we're maybe hearing about, excited about, this CES will actually still be talking about in a positive way 3 years from now? I want to say 3 years from now, because sometimes even the duds last an extra year. Or either which one we'll still be talking about, or which one will absolutely be dead, and we'll be like, oh, I can't believe we even thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, we will still not be driving level 5 autonomous cars. I promise you that. I do think that we are going to be in the middle of the wave of expansion of machine learning as it hits its application strides. So right now we're kind of in the infrastructure part of this, sort of laying the pipes and foundations for that. But I think we're going to begin to see some of those applications, which will include things like autonomous vehicles. But those will still be, I think, nascent. But I think we will be seeing really the applications built on top of some very fundamentally different computing architectures that are being born right now. So.
Maybe there will be parental controls into some of those. If the voice is high-pitched and sounds like my kid, don't respond after 8 p.m.
Exactly.
Guys, thank you for joining me here at One
John.
Market for Fortt Knox. Thank you all for joining us live this week on the Fortt Knox Podcast. Carter Ream, entrepreneur, co-founder of Vive Spirits. He did this with his brother in his 20s. They made millions of dollars selling it. Find out actually how they managed, without any background in alcohol and spirits, to come up with this brand, build it up, sell it. Now they're investing based in Southern California. Check out the podcast. You can get to that through iTunes, through Stitcher, Google Play, you name it. Just search for Fortt Knox. Thanks once again for joining us live. We'll see you next time.